for me. Blood in my dog and I can't see. I'm trying to be what I'm destined to be. And niggas trying to take my life away. I put a hole in a nigga for fucking.
What's up, YouTube? I'm getting back on the R33 finally because the head is back from the machine shop. Let me go over a few things that I've done the last week and a half. So as you can see, I cleaned up a lot of the hoses here underneath the intake manifold, and I got rid of the oil warmer. I am still waiting on the block nipple so that I can put the oil filter straight to the block. Obviously I can't start and run the car until I get that piece in, but it should be here today or tomorrow. I've got the oil pressure sensor relocated from the oil warmer to the block. You just buy some NPT adapters and it goes right into that hole. That hose there will connect to the hose that wraps around for the turbo. There's a hose that bolts to the back of the head, so that'll connect to that. I got some new fittings for the firewall for the heater hoses because those were brittle and broke. Also, I mounted the front mount intercooler. Instead of going with the real tall standard front mount intercooler, I went with a short one, but it is a 4-inch core, so it's thicker than most front mounts, but it's also shorter. And the reason why I did that is because I wasn't sure what my plans were going to be for this car, but just in case I did decide to keep it and drift it or whatever, I wanted to go ahead and put the power steering cooler in. So the easiest way to do that was to make a bracket that holds the top of the front mount intercooler, and then go ahead and mount the power steering cooler to that bracket as well. As you can see, I've got brackets that hold the bottom of the front mount on too. And I believe with the new body kit, the opening in the front bumper is going to go all the way up to here. So this bottom piece of the front core support is going to have to be cut out. So it's going to look pretty cool. When you look in there, you'll see the front mount, but then you'll also see the power steering cooler. I got that plumbed in just now. You basically just take the line that goes from here to the rack, take that out and throw it away, and then you go from the rack to the cooler, and then from the cooler back to the reservoir. I also got the Freddy manifold ready to go. Yesterday I went ahead and made a custom throttle bracket, so when I bolt it on, the throttle will be in the right position to work with the throttle body. I got the coolant stuff and the idle air control valve hooked up. Not exactly sure which of these I'm going to need yet till I get it installed, but I can always plug these if I have to, if I don't use something. Got my sensors swapped over to it, the fuel rails put on, the injector harness is put on and tucked underneath the manifold. The fuel lines are ready to be hooked up. I also got online and ordered a longer throttle cable, so I swapped that out already. So when I put the new intake manifold on, the throttle cable will reach. I also got the oil pan off in the last video and went ahead and took the oil pump off and swapped in the billet gears. So I do have billet gears in the oil pump now, and the oil pan is resealed. I do have a new spring for the timing belt tensioner, and obviously a new timing belt and all new drive belts for this car. So I need to swap out the tension spring. The block is pretty much prepped already for the head gasket. So I'm going to do one last cleaning on that. And then here's the head, fresh back from the machine shop with all new SuperTech valves. So I'm going to do one last cleaning on this and one last cleaning on the block so I can get the head gasket put on. Here's the head studs. Here's the new timing belt. So yeah, I'm gonna get to work. The head is officially on. So it's pretty easy to find the torque specs. You basically start in the middle and work your way around. Do it twice, loosen it back to 0, and then do it 2 more times. And then you got a bolt here, a bolt there. And then when you put this bolt on, make sure you have this bracket installed for the turbo line, unless you have braided lines. because that bolt holds the bracket on as well. I'm gonna go ahead and finish putting the valve train on. I went ahead and turned the motor backwards a little bit to bring all the pistons down so I wouldn't have any interference. So now I can put the cams in, torque all that stuff down, and then do all the timing components. And then that way I can set these to TDC first, and then when I turn this to TDC, it won't interfere with anything. So I'm gonna get started on that. All right, guys, I'm gonna call it a night. Let me show you what I got done so far. The valve train on, the cams and caps and everything, and the valve covers, and the timing components are done. So all the accessories are on, timing covers. Got kind of a mess here. This is where I took the head apart. So tomorrow will be turbo, downpipe, heat shields, and intake manifold. That'll wrap up this side, wrap up this side. I'm gonna try to run the factory airbox. I think it just looks cleaner. So that I can use the factory rubber hose from the turbo to the airbox. I think it'll just give it a cleaner look than just having an intake filter sitting around there, but we'll see. I did order a front mount intercooler piping kit and blow off valve setup. So once I get the exhaust and intake sides completely installed, fabricate the intercooler piping for both sides. I think he'll be able to tuck it nicely. I cut a big opening underneath the airbox. So I think he'll be able to tuck the intercooler piping nicely on this side so that I can keep the factory airbox. But yeah, coming along nicely. I'll see you guys tomorrow. You can see I got the intake manifold installed. Throttle body was already hooked up to it. Idle air control was already hooked up to it. Got the throttle cable hooked up. Got the fuel lines routed and hooked up. Flopped the harness back over. Got that all plugged in. Got the drive belts on. And I also got the exhaust manifold on. So really all I have left is the turbo, the heat shields. Then I need to go get new spark plugs so I can put the coil packs on. I'm gonna put that on now. Turbo's on, exhaust is hooked back up, heat shields are on. Got the factory airbox set in. I'm pretty sure this will be a nice, easy transition to get under the airbox. Take it to the front mount. And then I still got to cut a hole on this side to get that pipe down to the front mount. But overall, pretty stoked. Looks good. I'm gonna call it a day because I got to go get some new spark plugs so I can put the coil packs and everything in place. And I need some more hoses for vacuum lines. And I'm waiting on the oil nipple for the block still. It's been a couple days since I've worked on the R33, but I'm gonna get back on it because I got my piping kit and I mocked it all up and took it to Oscar and got it all welded. So I'm gonna get that installed and run all the vacuum lines, and then I might be able to start this thing tonight. We'll see. Of course, it couldn't be that simple. I was topping off all the fluids, so I got oil, power steering fluid, and water. And then I looked under the car just before I was ready to start it, and I noticed a bunch of water dripping. And I was like, okay, maybe one of the hoses was loose. But then I noticed it was pooling right here. So I used some air pressure and cleaned off all the water. And then I looked closely at that area while I put more water in it, and it's coming out from the gasket between the Freddy manifold and the head, which is kind of a known problem with these Freddy manifolds. When you buy them, a lot of people will take them straight to a machine shop or a machinist and have the mounting surface completely flattened or resurfaced. But yeah, I don't get to start the car tonight. Oscar, luckily, has a race gasket, which is, I think, like 5 millimeters thick. So it has nice compression to bolt down the manifold to the head. So I'm gonna unbolt this right now, take the piping off, get it all off and ready to go. So tomorrow I can swap out that gasket for the race gasket and then bolt it all back together. So what I did was I went to Oscar. Oscar had these pre-made race manifold gaskets for the RB25, and I just got done installing it. So you can see the gasket, how thick it is. And he also recommended putting RTV on the manifold side of the gasket and the head side. So that way if there's any imperfections in the Freddy manifold, it'll either get eaten up by the thick race gasket or it'll get eaten up by the RTV. So what I did was I RTV'd it to the manifold with a couple of bolts in place holding it still. Let that set for like 20 minutes, and then I put it on the head and sunk it down with the RTV on that side. So it's installed. I also went and got some new vacuum line hose to replace the old stuff that I had laying around. So I ran all new vacuum, and I'll show you my vacuum setup. So I have the factory air intake. I blocked the large hose on the factory intake, and on the small hose I did have some Mishimoto hose laying around. So I ran this to the small hose like factory, and then I ran this across these two just like factory, and then I ran the PCV to the intake manifold like the factory setup. I've also got the factory boost sensor for the gauge inside, so I ran that to the intake manifold, and then I went from the intake manifold to the blow-off valve. And then I have the idle air control hose right there, comes through here, and that also goes to the intake. And we're pretty sure this solenoid here regulates factory boost. So it's like 7 or 8 PSI under normal driving conditions, and then at wide open throttle, it'll peak up to like 10 or 11. So without plumbing that in, you'll just be stuck at 7, which is wastegate pressure. So I went ahead and put a hose on the intercooler piping. So I went from there to that solenoid and then to the wastegate. So hopefully that'll operate like normal, and I'll still have that OEM fluctuation and boost level. I already showed you guys I have the power steering cooler set up, so that's all plumbed, topped off. And I can't start the car right now just because I don't want to have to take the intake manifold off again. So I'm going to let the RTV sit overnight so it has a 100% cure cycle. So then I can top off the water and crank this thing over. It's already got oil in it. It's already got power steering fluid in it. So all I need to do is fill it up with water and turn this baby on. I think I'm going to save that for the next video. So stay tuned for my next video, guys, and see if this thing runs. And if it does, hopefully it runs good. And I'll probably just throw the stock wheels back on it and go for a test drive. Like always, if you want, like, comment, and subscribe. It helps out with, YouTube stuff, but just doing this for fun. But I'm pretty excited for tomorrow. Tomorrow's the day I get to hear this thing start for the first time, and it'll probably be the first time it's ran good for years, I would assume. Stay tuned.